Imagine you're cleaning out your attic or going through your old card collection and you stumble upon a $10,000 baseball card, like this 1951 Bowman Mickey Mantle rookie card. Now, you might think this is crazy, but it actually happens more often than you think, as I've gotten this question a couple of times. And this one today comes from Ron. So Ron, thank you so much for reaching out. In this video, I'm going to tell you what I would do in this scenario. But first, congratulations on finding this awesome Mickey Mantle card. It looks to be in really good condition for its age. I'm so excited for you, and hopefully this video gives you and everyone else following some ideas of what to do if you find a card like this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look up the value of the cards. So this is my baseball starting lineup here. So leading off, I went to psacard.com. You can look at past auction prices and you can see the values of this 1951 Bowman card for a bunch of different grades. And so obviously if you had a PSA 9 mint card worth $3.2 million, all the way down to a PSA 1, which is about $4,800, and so forth. Now we have a good idea of the price range. This is definitely a card worth getting graded. In general, anything that is a graded value or a likely graded value where it's worth $300 or more is probably worth getting graded. And so obviously the first thing I would do is then now get this card graded. When it comes to grading cards, you have a couple options. I have written a blog on this that goes into a little more detail, but I'll give you the quick version here. The reason I like grading any valuable card is because, one, it authenticates the card. So if you're going to sell a card for $10,000 to somebody else somewhere down in the future, they are going to want to make sure that they're getting a real card. And that's what these third parties do. Secondly, it locks in the condition of the card. So, if you handle the card, you might accidentally give it a crease or nick an edge or a corner. And so this protects it. It also protects it from UV damage like sunlight. Obviously, it can't protect all of it, so keep your cards out of the sun. But this basically locks in its value. And then they grade the card. And so the grade they give assigned, whether it's a 1 or a 10, really everyone then agrees upon the value. So if you have a raw card, people might say, oh, it's only worth a few thousand to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what they think it'll eventually grade at. But once you have it graded, there's no debate. Everyone knows the value of your card. Now, among the top three, we have PSA, Beckett, and SGC. For you specifically in this situation, I don't recommend Beckett. Cards that are older than 1979, Beckett has a Beckett vintage grading system that does not command as much of a premium as PSA or even SGC in this case. So I've taken Beckett out of the mix here, and we're really looking at PSA versus SGC. You can see with the two options here, PSA is sort of the default. There's nothing wrong with going to PSA. Personally, if this is a card that you planned to keep and you didn't care about resale value, I think SGC makes the card presentation look a little better, and we'll talk about that. If you are looking to sell the card, there's no doubt that a PSA graded card gets more money for the same grade than an SGC card. So you can see here a 1951 Bowman Mickey Mantle in a PSA 3 gets you about $15,400, while if it's an SGC 3, you're only talking about $12,000. And same with a PSA 2, it gets about $8,400, while it's only $7,500 if it were SGC. But as I mentioned, I put a couple of cards I had here on the white piece of paper, so you can see that the PSA holders, they kind of have a less than visually eye-pleasing red border at the top, and then their cases are clear. So I really like how SGC fills in their case with this black cardboard, which really frames the card and it makes it look a little more premium. In fact, on their website, they say that the card is putting a tuxedo on. So if you just want to grade the card to protect it for your own personal collection, SGC is a possibility, but I think PSA is sort of the no-brainer, so I want to talk you through that now. If you submit a card like this to PSA, slightly controversially in the hobby, PSA now charges more money for grading cards that are more valuable. So you can see cards that are worth $500 or less, the typical value or the typical cost to get them graded is $24.99, and then it goes all the way up to a card about $10,000 or less, which is $499, but you can also see that the turnaround time decreases from 45 days to just 5 days for the more valuable card. A card like yours, which could be worth over $10,000, they do have some premium options for cards that are worth up to $25,000, $50,000, $100,000, and so forth. We'll come back to this, but you can see that the more valuable your card, the more expensive it is to have it graded. Now, because PSA has done this, just about everybody's doing this, so SGC does the same thing. Their prices are a little bit lower on the low end, but for cards worth $100,000 or more, they end up being a little bit more expensive than PSA. But I really like the low price entry level that you can get, a card grade for just $15 from SGC if it's only worth $1,500 or less. So now, in order to figure out how much it's going to cost you to grade this card, we need to estimate the value of your card. Thank you so much for sending these beautiful pictures of your card. It is a wonderful holy grail of baseball cards, the 1951 Mickey Mantle Bowman Rookie. So I've used yours to make an estimate of the grade. Please do not hold me to this. I don't work for PSA or any official grading companies, but I'll walk you through how I got there. But I have come to the conclusion that there's probably an 80% chance that your card will grade between PSA 1.5 and 4, which sounds like a big range, but actually the value of the card remains fairly consistent there between $8,000 up to $12,000. I think there's a 10% chance your card could grade a 4 or higher, like a 5, but I think there's also a chance it could grade a PSA 1, which means either paper loss or some staining, which we can talk about. But again, all of this I'm guessing without your card in hand. So if I had a magnifying glass, I would look under a closer examination. So I'm just roughly making estimates. Don't hold me to it. This is just a rough ballpark for you to consider. How I got there was by looking at PSA's grading standards, which I've turned into a simple chart here. And on the left-hand side, I have the values of the 1951 Bowman Mickey Mantle rookie cards based on the grade that PSA has and their criteria. So we'll start with your card, and using the front of the card here, the first thing I'm going to look at is centering. And so you can see your card is off center towards the left side and slightly towards the top. And so what I do is I use a measurement, and I measure the left to right widths in PowerPoint, and I zoom in and do this so it's more precise than maybe what you see here on the screen. And I got your left to right measurement to be about 74/26. So that's not bad, but it does take away probably a PSA 7 or above just solely on centering, and we've got a lot more criteria to go. But your top to bottom was pretty close at 57-43%. So pretty good centering there, top to bottom. Next, I look at the back of the card. To be in the PSA 6 range or so, you only need a 90-10. While it's hard to estimate the top to bottom and left to right on the back of a card like this without borders, it's pretty clear to me that you will qualify for any of these grades between PSA 1 and PSA 6 based on the back centering. So no issues there. Now let's look at the front of the card, and we're going to go towards corners. So as we look at the corners, and I know you have more detailed up-close images than maybe people can see on the screen here, but on the front of the card, your top left corner is probably the roughest corner on the card. I'm pretty sure that they would consider that to be definitely frayed and starting to get into some rounding, as well as when you look at the back, the top right corner, which as I tried to figure this out, I don't think it's the same as your front top left, but maybe I need to think about that in space. So I think you were probably at the PSA 5 or below for the amount of rounding and the degree to which they assign it. You have some really nice corners, and then you have some that are dinged up a little bit more. So it's tricky. So I think I've given that a pretty wide range here. Now, edge wear, from my point of view, your edges look really pretty good for this old card. I did highlight on the front side of the card here on the left, there's a pretty significant notch, some notching into the edge right there. And so, I think you're a little bit beyond minor chipping and into more chipping. So I think this puts you in the PSA range of like a 1 to a 4. But again, I'm not a professional grader by any standpoint. And then as we look at print defects, I've pointed out here, you've got a black print defect in the top left of the front of the card. You've got a white print defect on the top right. And then you've got these kind of bluish, maybe gray print defects in the white border on the bottom of your card in 2 places. So I think this puts you pretty squarely in the PSA 1 to 4 based on visible print defects. But this is still a great looking card. Don't feel bad about it. And it's going to be a very viable card. And then when it comes to stains, I do think your top left border has some discoloration in the images that you sent me, as well as maybe just near that notching on the actual card itself. There might be slight staining on the card there. You would know better than I would. I don't have the card in person to really zoom in on this, but it looks like not just staining on the edges, but on the surface of the card. So this is narrowing in on the PSA 2 to PSA 3 range based on some surface staining. The back looks really good. I don't see anything there. Yeah, I would say it's slight staining on the front of the card. So that's where that comes in. Next, we look at discolored borders. As I mentioned, your top left side of this card on the front has some discoloration, so it's either slight off-white or discolored borders. So that, again, I've kind of put a 1 to 4 range here for this one. And then this is it's not a photo card because 1951, these were artistic drawings. So I don't think there's any issue with the focus of the card. We don't have to worry about that. The cards back then, I don't think they were included a gloss finish to them, and none that I could see that would have worn off meaningfully from at least the pictures that you shared with me. So I'm not worried about either of those two. The next one that you will have to let me know about is surface wear. On the back of the card, I do see some potential scratches, but I think it could also be on your top loader. And I don't see too much surface wear other than kind of the top left on the front, sort of where the card gets a little bit dark or dirty. I think there's a little bit of surface wear there. I don't believe there's scratches or scuffs per se. And then the last but not least is creases. Your card looks really good. It doesn't look to be creased, at least from the photos that I can tell. If they do ding you for a crease, it's going to be just on the inside of this top left corner on the front of the card, sort of like where it frays but comes into, is there a slight crease there? But that's not going to hurt the grading overall. I think based on my non-professional opinion, and this is just my guess, that you're looking at a PSA 2 to PSA 3. This is assuming that the card meets minimum size requirements, so that the card hasn't been trimmed, obviously. It also makes sure that there's no paper loss. So if your top left corner is severe enough that they think there's paper loss, they knock you down to a PSA 1. But I don't think you're going to have any issues with paper loss. I think you're going to be at least a PSA 1.5, which means having all of the paper on the card. And really the price difference between a PSA 1.5 and a 2 and a 3 here, you're talking about difference between $8,000 and $12,000. That's kind of where I see it. So again, that is just my rough estimate. The reason I feel confident that it'll be a PSA 1.5 to 4 is based on everything I just told you. For sure, people have had surprises when they send in the graders. So I always add a 10% chance that I could be wrong on the low side and they come back with a PSA 5. But there's also a 10% chance that PSA comes down and gives you a 1. So just be aware that different graders, even at the same establishment, and sometimes people say even with their different moods, whether it's first thing in the morning or late in the day, can be more picky or particular. Hopefully it's much more systematized than that. But that's my best estimate. And that estimate is important for not only the cost you're going to pay for grading, but the amount you're going to insure the card for when you ship it. Now, to give myself a real-world reality check based on everything we just went through, I did find a PSA 3 of this 1951 Bowman Mickey Mantle card that's here on the left, and you can see it has some fair amount of off-centering, and it even has what I would consider like a discoloration running down through the front of the card. Hard to tell here if that's on the slab, but it looks to be a print defect on the card. And to my eye, without being able to see the back of this PSA example that I found, for example, your card definitely looks better than that PSA 3. And I found a PSA 4 here that is better centered with better corners to the card. And I think that I would say that the PSA 4 card is better condition than your card. So I'm kind of putting you closer to a PSA 3, but it's somewhere in that range as my estimate. So if you're in the PSA 3 or even PSA 4, it doesn't change the value very much. You're talking about a $12,000 to a $13,000 card. And if it comes back on the low end, a PSA 1.5 and a PSA 2 both come in at about $8,500. So we've got a pretty good estimate, I think, of the value of this card that you found. So first of all, congratulations. It is an amazing, beautiful card. What that means for grading is you're somewhere between $500 for PSA to grade it if it's $10,000 or less, or $800 for PSA to grade it if it's $25,000 or less. Both of them have 5 business day turnarounds. The reason that if this was my card, that I would pay the $800 to ship it to them for cards valued up to $25,000 is because if something happens in shipping, I would insure the card for $13,000, and so by declaring the value of $13,000, you wouldn't qualify for the lower priced $500 option. But I would want to make sure that I got the full value of the card if it was lost. And $300 to me doesn't seem to be that big a deal when it comes to having a $10,000 or $13,000 card. Now, here's something a lot of people don't know that I want to make sure you're aware of. If you choose this $800 option and PSA comes back and says your card graded higher, like a PSA 5 or a 6, where it would put you in the range of $20,000 card, $30,000 card, $40,000 card, they will ask to come back for the next tier. So you would have to pay an additional $700 to get to this $1,500 price range before they ship the card back to you. And then if you, by a miracle it was a PSA 7 where your card would be worth over $100,000, they would ask you to pay the difference to get to the $2,500 price. So if you paid $800, they would come back at you for the remaining, what is that, $1,800, $1,700 for you to get your card back. Now, that's a surprise fee, but you would be dancing in the streets if your card did get that high of a grade. So just wanted to make you aware of it. Now, if you are not concerned about the value of your card and more it's a card that you want to protect for your own collection, it is worth pointing out that the cost to grade the card through SGC for anything below $20,000 value, which would be SGC 1.5 to even SGC 5, it would only be $500. And then SGC 6 might be $1,000 and so forth. So that's just something to consider. I think the no-brainer is to send it into PSA. Can't go wrong there, but I just wanted to make you aware that if your cash outlay at the very beginning was a factor and it's a card that you didn't want to sell and you wanted to pass down through the generations, but just have it protected, that's another choice. So now that we've estimated the value of your card, we know how much you're going to cost to grade. The next thing that most people don't think about is we want to fingerprint your card. And what that means is I don't think this is likely, and I think the big grading companies are very reputable. But some people, especially when they have a card as valuable as yours, are worried that what if I'm sending in $1 million card and it's a PSA 9, but when they get it, they swap it out with a lower one and send it back to me at a PSA 4, and they keep my $1 million card. So to make sure that you get your card back, I call this fingerprinting your card, where you're going to take detailed images of the front and back, and I know you have some here that you sent me. And from these, you can see there's very specific things about your card that we've called out already, like the black print defect on the top left, the white print defect in the cloud on the top right side, and these kind of gray, maybe light blue ones inside the border area at the bottom. There is almost no chance that PSA could swap a card for one that looks like this card. Your card is so unique with these different markings as well as the centering that it would be pretty easy for you to make sure that you get your card back and they can't swap it out for you. So I would just take detailed images and document that that's the card that you sent in, and if there's any questions of the card, if you were to get it back. But now we're going to talk about prepping it for grading. So Ron, I know you mentioned that you're concerned about sending your card through the mail, and who wouldn't be if they had such a wonderful, valuable card. So there are some in-person options coming next, but just as general advice for anyone who has a valuable card, this is what you would do. You would go to psacard.com/submit, and if you pick the right level grading based on the value you've selected, they will give you some instructions on what to do to prepare your card. Now, Ron, your card is in a top loader with the rigid sides. You will see in the instructions for PSA or even SGC that they prefer to receive cards in these semi-rigid Card Saver 2s. And these are the ones that are the tall ones in the back here. They are flimsy, but it's easy to spread apart and pull cards in and out. So it's definitely easier for the grader. You would have to make sure they're protected even better because, again, they're not rigid. But I have called PSA and talked to them for customers in the past, and I just want you to know that if I found a $10,000 card, there's no way I want to touch it. There's no way I want to pull it out of a card holder or anything like that. So you can submit it in its current top loader to PSA, and it may take them a few extra days to process the card, but they will remove it from the rigid top loader and properly grade it. So to me, especially for a card that's, where condition really affects the value, I wouldn't mess with touching it. I would submit it as you have it, and they can work with it from there, even though they prefer not to. But PSA has some very detailed videos and instructions on how to prepare your order for shipping in terms of top loaders, protecting it with cardboard and all those sorts of good things. So if you're going to ship it into them, please make sure you watch those videos, and that's on psacard.com/info/ship guide. But Ron, I know you mentioned wanting to explore some in-person grading options. Now, personally, if it was my card and I only cared about the value of the card in terms of dollars, I would probably ship a $10,000 card into PSA, have it insured, and if it was lost, I would get my $13,000 back and I would be okay with it. However, if this is a card where you said if they lost it and you got $13,000 back for it, you would still be upset because you no longer have your card, and this is a card you want in your collection specifically, and you don't want a replacement card for it, then I can certainly understand why you would want in-person grading. So the good news is PSA does have some in-person grading options. The National Sports Card Convention just happened this past weekend, so here we are in the end of July here, so we've just missed it. And the pricing is actually still about the same. And so for a card like yours, if it's a $500 fee that you pay for any card worth up to $10,000, you would get it back from PSA by the end of the day. But for a card that's worth up to $25,000 that you pay $800 for, it's actually just a 3-hour turnaround time. Now, if you go to the card show, you'll want to do this early in the week or early in the convention so that the queues don't get long and all that good stuff. But there are in-person opportunities where PSA does this on site. So for more information on that, you would go to psacard.com/resources/shows. They have a list of their upcoming shows, and they do add more shows over time and get more details. And you would specifically look for shows that on them they say that they have on-site card grading. The thing you'll want to watch out for is this example here at the bottom where they don't have on-site card grading, but they'll say they're accepting take-home submissions of cards. So that's where you would show up to the show with your card in person, give it to them, but then they take it with them, grade it, and send it back to you. So based on what we've talked about, I don't think that's an option for you. There are more card shows that do that, but for example, the National this year did have on-site card grading. And so you'll want to look through the additional upcoming shows. And then if you can't find one that's close to you in your area of the United States, then there is the National Card Show that comes every year. And so it will be in Chicago in 2025, 2026, and 2027. So there are opportunities to do that. The other thing you could do is contact PSA directly or SGC directly, find out where their grading locations are, and you could potentially arrange to meet them in person at their grading facilities and work it out at their facility rather than at a card show. So until then, these are some other tips of what I would do with a $10,000 card. Ron, first of all, congratulations on your amazing find. That is a Holy Grail card. It's amazing. So keep enjoying your card and keep it safe. and out of sunlight as much as you can. And then keep following us here at Sports Cards Edge for more advice. Reach out to me for any more questions. And if you are gain some value out of this and you haven't joined us yet, make sure you like and subscribe to the video. And we will post more helpful videos like this in the near future. And Ron, congratulations. I can't wait to hear what you do with your card.